Pro Cannabis Media original content is supported by Salient Systems, your trusted name in video surveillance for the cannabis industry. And by Revolutionary Clinics, Massachusetts #1 medical dispensary where the patient comes first. And by Accounting Buds, getting your cannabis finances in the right order. And by Artery Pay. They demystify and modernize digital payments for cannabis. And by YourStory.com, award-winning storage solution for the discriminating cannabis consumer. Okay, let's all take a big Friday afternoon, deep breath, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Friday edition of Green Rush Live. I'm Jimmy Young with Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm David Rabinovitz, his trusty sidekick.
My trusty sidekick. And always, we are so happy to have a member of the NCIA with us, especially on a week where, once again, there seems to be a little news going on in our nation's capital. First of all, Morgan Fox, happy 38th birthday to you. Welcome back to Green Rush Live.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Tell us about the two Republican members of the House of Representatives who have filed a bill for the legalization of cannabis in the United States of America without any mention at all of social justice in this bill. Tell us how this all came about, and were you surprised that they went ahead and did that?
Well, so this bill was introduced by Representatives Don Young and David Joyce, both of whom are co-chairs of the bipartisan Congressional Cannabis Caucus. And it basically would remove cannabis from the Federal Controlled Substances Act. It directs the FDA and the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau to issue regulations around cannabis that's modeled similarly to the alcohol industry within 1 year of enactment, which is a somewhat similar structure to what NCIA has been proposing. It would create basically a safe harbor for financial institutions and other businesses in non-cannabis legal states to provide services to cannabis companies, and would allow the Department of Veterans Affairs to prescribe medical cannabis to veterans, and would also direct the National Institute of Health to conduct studies on both pain management and cannabis impairment within 2 years of enactment and report that to Congress. It's not surprising, really, if you think about it, to see Republicans trying to introduce descheduling bills. I think that the November elections were really a wake-up call to the GOP, showing that not only are states that they control increasingly moving away from prohibition and towards regulated cannabis markets, and that their constituents are not only willing to pass these, but will directly benefit from changes at the federal level in terms of business protections and legal protections and personal use rights and things of that nature. But I think that also, just looking at the overall political situation, it was really important knowing what Republicans learned in the November elections and in the time since then about support for legalization, that they be able to plant their flag on the issue and show their constituents and their base that they're not just sitting on the sidelines. They're being really active and, in fact, proactive on the issue in some fashion. I personally have a couple of additional theories about exactly why this bill was introduced. I think that, first of all, it's a way for Representatives Joyce and Young to be able to gauge their GOP colleagues in the House and see where they're at on the issue in a little bit more of an official manner. But I also think that it serves as sort of a, not to use a bad term, but a gateway for members of the GOP to be able to get into the issue and start to dip their toe into supporting legal cannabis. And that really opens up an opportunity to push them a little bit farther once you get them through the door. I think that it is, we absolutely should talk about the fact that there aren't really any sort of social equity or restorative justice provisions in this. And that really has been the sticking point for a lot of Republicans in Congress. And at some point, they're going to have to own up to that and answer why that is.
Right. And if, correct me if I'm wrong, Chuck Schumer and Cory Booker's bill that they continue to kind of keep on the hush hush in the Senate is driven by social justice, isn't it?
Yes, well, we haven't seen the draft language yet, but that's everything that we've been hearing from conversations with their offices. And, the same goes in the House with the MORE Act. This is a bill that is specifically focused on social justice and repairing the harms caused by prohibition, in addition to ending the failed policies of prohibition. That bill is expected to get reintroduced in the House sometime this month with some changes from the way that it was passed in December in the House. Particularly removing a provision that would have allowed federal licensors to prohibit anybody that had a felony from getting a federal cannabis business license. And even though it didn't mandate it, it would have allowed for that. And that really flies directly in the face of the whole purpose of the MORE Act. So that's being stripped out. And we expect to see a couple of other changes from the House passed earlier version as well. So, maybe what we're looking at here is a way for getting Republicans' feet in the door, and then providing a place for them to negotiate between this very relatively bare bones bill, and although still more robust than the States Act, and something like the MORE Act or the Schumer bill.
Gotcha. David, you got something for Morgan? Come on, David.
No, Jimmy. I'm keep going, Jimmy.
All right.
I'm watching the chat, and this is actually very fascinating.
Yeah, well, it should be, because this is the horse trading time for the Republicans and the Democrats, because now you've got a couple of Republicans in the House showing initiative with cannabis reform. At least that's what I take away from it. However, of course, I don't think it goes far enough. But more importantly, does anything that goes on in the House kind of send a signal to the Senate that perhaps now is the time to introduce what they hope will be the bill? And does it matter where the origination of a bill comes from, whether it's the Senate or the House?
Well, I mean, we've been expecting that bill to be introduced pretty soon for a while now, and Senator Schumer keeps saying soon.
Yeah.
But we're pretty confident that it's going to get dropped this month. And at that point, I think that it's going to be a pretty intense debate in the Senate, because, as we've discussed before, in order to get something like that passed, you have to get a certain number of Republicans in the Senate on board without alienating too many Democrats in order to beat the filibuster. So I think that is going to be pretty challenging, considering that so far, we've seen that there's that pretty hard line when it comes to the GOP about including restorative justice provisions and social equity provisions in these bills. However, as you said, when we're looking at the House, if the House can come to some sort of a compromise and be able to get more Republicans more comfortable with a more comprehensive and more historically reparative bill, then that, I'm sure, would send a signal to the Senate and be able to make the idea of GOP members supporting something like Schumer's bill, whatever it ends up looking like, a little bit more palatable to them, and really start to build bipartisan consensus. I mean, really what this is all about is just shifting the Overton window. We have an opportunity now to ask for a whole lot when it comes to the social justice aspects of this. And really just the idea is to get what is acceptable to the rest of Congress, who's not necessarily on board, further down the line and more into the realm of where we want things to be. And I think that, this new Joyce and Young bill is potentially a vehicle for that. Again, politics is weird, and it's going to be tough to see exactly how that works out. But I think that it is an opportunity to engage Republicans and to help, get their foot in the door for supporting just a descheduling period. And then once they're there, start working on them really heavily on, why don't you want restorative justice? Why don't you want social equity? What exactly is the problem here? What would you accept and what wouldn't you? And to start moving farther down the road towards a compromise that actually does address some of the harms caused by prohibition, as opposed to just all right, well, it's legal now, don't worry about history.
In the states that have, I'm sorry, go ahead, Jim.
No. Go ahead. I was going to actually give him, I loved his quote, politics is weird. Go ahead, David.
So, Morgan, in the states that have legalized by voter initiative, any sense of what the yes votes percentage-wise are generally? I mean, is it typically overwhelming, or does it sometimes just skate by the skin of its teeth?
Up until pretty recently, the margins at the state level tended to be pretty narrow. In 2016, California set the record with 57% support. But 4 years later, New Jersey set the new record with 67% support. So in 4 years, we saw that margin jump 10%. That is huge. And so I think that we're starting to see that more and more just in general. But I mean, even when you look at the red states that won their initiatives in November, you're still looking at much bigger margins than sometimes we had seen in the past. You know, like Arizona in, I think it was 2010 or something like that, maybe I believe approved their, or maybe it was 2014. The years are blending together, honestly.
Sure.
But the first, when Arizona approved medical cannabis through ballot initiative, I think it came down to like 3,000 votes. You know, something really, really small. But now we're looking at places like Montana and South Dakota, where adult use won by 53, 54%. It's still a pretty narrow margin, but it's a lot better than it has been. And then when you look at bluer states at that same election, with New Jersey passing with 67% of the electorate, that's the general support is just growing by leaps and bounds. And I think it's also the fact that advocates are starting to learn how to put together bills that appeal better to the populace.
What about when it's legislatively voted in? What kind of margins do you see in those cases?
I mean, honestly, we don't have a big enough sample size to work with at this point. It's always been a little bit tight, but I think that it's still a struggle to get any sort of legalization, or at least adult use, through state legislatures. And then, we're seeing in places like in the South where it's difficult to even get medical through. Or places like Nebraska, or et cetera. So, I think that it's difficult to really judge from state politics margins, because state politics are just as screwy as federal politics. And while the intricacies of state politics are very important in terms of enacting laws there, they don't necessarily transmit to what lawmakers from those states think. I think that they're much more concerned about what their constituents think and what their constituents can gain from federal legislation, as opposed to what state lawmakers have said or how they feel about it.
Do you mind, David? Just real
Not
quick.
at all.
Like this, I think you will. I need Morgan to enlighten me a little bit about this political weirdness that goes on in Washington, D.C. And the question I have is simple. If you are from a state like these two guys, I think one was from Arkansas. Am I right? Am I wrong? The Republican guys from the House?
No, Alaska and Ohio.
Okay. Not even close to Arkansas. That being said, do the House of Representatives from each state ever impact what goes on with the senators from that state? And now I guess my question is, do they actually talk to each other in the hallways, at lunch counters, or wherever these days, and say, hey, look, I'm getting a lot of comments and emails and people calling us, our constituents actually talking to the House of Representatives? Can they just walk over and sit down and talk with the senators and say, you guys are living in the past a little bit. You got to get a little bit more contemporary and listen to what's going on in our state? Does that happen, or is it strictly through channels, as they say in Washington, D.C.?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. I mean, there's clearly a lot of communication between the House and Senate, both within, individual state delegations, as well as regional delegations and party delegations. So, I mean, there's plenty of conversation going on there. I'm not sure how much of sort of the state level political machinations really filter their way up to Congress, but I'm sure it has an effect in some cases, and probably much more so if a senator is looking at a potential governorship in the future, or vice versa.
You mean to tell me there's selfish reasons for politics to actually advance their own cause? I am shocked to hear that.
I mean, not only is politics weird, though, but it's also the art of the possible.
Yes.
And so I think that it requires a lot of compromise and a lot of pragmatism across the board. And, the impression that I'm getting from, these conversations at both the state and the federal level is that people are much more willing to compromise when you've got a vast majority of their constituents in support of an issue.
That's democracy, isn't it? I think a true democracy. That's the idea anyway. You would think that. Okay, David, go.
Great. So I've got one question. It's my
There's
And then I
David.
got dogs in the
There's
background.
David barking again.
There we go. So I've got one question for you from me, and then I got a few questions that are going to come right out of the feed, right out of the chat feed. My first one is a little bit of an odd one. So this past week, there's been discussion about infrastructure funding. I think the Republicans came out and said we could support, I think it was an $800 billion infrastructure bill as long as it's supported by user fees. And I read what they mean is they want to hike the gas tax. Personally, I happen to be very much in favor of hiking the gas tax, but that goes to everybody, including those earning under $400,000. So what I read is it's unlikely that the White House would go along with that because the current president promised there would not be new taxes on people earning below $400,000. And what I read was it's kind of like a trap for the Republicans are trying to jam the Democrats in a corner on funding for infrastructure. Here's my question. If we've got two Republican House members who are going to introduce a bill to legalize marijuana, could this begin to push some of the other House members back into a corner on what their position is? And when you build in my earlier question, how much is it going to, do you think it's going to influence them if they're from states that have approved it at the state level and yet they're fighting it at the federal level?
I mean, as I said, the Republicans are starting to wake up to the fact that their base is increasingly supportive of legalization, and having a Republican option for them that isn't real heavy on things that some of their constituents probably don't care about or are for some reason actively opposed to, will allow them to get their foot in the door. And I think that that's the point at which real negotiations can happen, and where like we can start shifting the Overton window more in the direction of social justice. I think that I don't think we're at the level yet where most members of the GOP in Congress think that, or really recognize the fact that there could be political consequences to obstructing legalization. But even if they do recognize that, they just don't have to obstruct it. That doesn't mean that they have to, jump on board and be champions either. But I'm sure that particularly, as you mentioned, people that are representing states that have regulated cannabis markets, either for medical or adult use, will very much be started to feel the pressure to back some form of descheduling legislation in the near future when they have options available for them that are politically palatable to their base as well as the overlords of their party.
Does the ouster? Oh, go ahead. I want to. Real quick question. Does the ouster of Liz Cheney and the leadership role in the House have any effect on movement of cannabis legalization?
I mean, not directly that I've seen, but again, we get back to that politics is weird thing. Every single issue is affected by every single other one in little tiny and sometimes indiscernible ways. It's all just a big weights and measures game with a lot of lawmakers and figuring out exactly, what they can do here that allows them to do something else there. So I think it remains to be seen. And there are so many variables on the table that it's really hard to pin down exactly what sort of impacts, every single action that happens will have on a particular issue. And this is particularly important because cannabis is a low priority issue for a lot of lawmakers, for most of them, in fact, and even for most voters. There are a small group of people and a small group of lawmakers that is the number one issue, but for the rest of folks, it's pretty far down the scale, probably below number 5 on their list of issue priorities. So, I always like to say that it's, support is a mile wide and an inch deep. And whether or not people are going to be willing to trade political capital to get things across the finish line, I think is going to really depend on a whole slew of things that we can't possibly foresee. But that being said, there's so much momentum right now, and this is such low-hanging fruit if politicians would really look at it and look at the level of public support and look at the immediate benefits that could be reaped from changing laws at the federal level and what that would do to benefit their states, and the vast majority of states. It's possible that this is something that could get really fast-tracked. And we already have Senate leadership prioritizing this issue, which is basically half the battle.
Great.
There you go.
Cool. All right. I know that we got the Waldos knocking on the back of Jimmy's head, but I want to just run through the chat feed really quick. So Morgan, Matt Simon wants you to know he wishes you a happy birthday.
Awesome.
That's number one.
Matt's coming on a little bit later too.
And then we've got Josh Sanner, who'd like you to talk a little bit about some commentary on Pennsylvania and And I think Dennis Gaffney may want a little bit of commentary on Wisconsin, if he could provide that.
Well, honestly, I'm not as familiar with the details in those states as I would
Okay.
like to be. I'm mostly focusing on federal stuff at this point. But when you have leadership in Pennsylvania really pushing this issue, and the fact that all the states around it are actively considering it or are in the act of implementing regulated cannabis systems, lawmakers in Pennsylvania should be feeling the pressure to get something done. And from what I can see, at least from the lieutenant governor's Twitter feed and some of the political rags that I try to follow, that that's not really happening in the legislature,
Right.
which is unfortunate because they're going to find themselves in a place where they're being left behind in terms of job creation and revenue generation as all of their neighbors move forward and start implementing modern cannabis policies. In terms of Wisconsin, I think that comes down to another odd political thing where you've got the governor in support, you've got the Democratic legislature in support, but the Republican-controlled legislature or legislative chambers are not in support yet. And with all of these states, they're kind of running out of time. These sessions all have different start and end dates, and they tend to be pretty short. I don't know why they are so short generally. Or you look at a state like Texas, where they only have legislative sessions once every other year. So I think some of these supporters in these states are a little bit under the gun. And, it's something that starts to need to be addressed immediately. Speed to market is huge, but I mean, even more than that, every year that you delay this is, generally, particularly in states like Pennsylvania, you're talking about tens of thousands of people being arrested every year for this. And, that seriously impacts people's lives. So delaying it it can be really problematic.
It also clogs up the legal process too, and I think that's one of the driving forces in the whole thing. Morgan Fox, as usual, so appreciate you coming to bat at 4:00. You're off the hook for next week's regular appearance. All right, we'll consider that a birthday present. And but again, thank you so much for joining us as always, Morgan.
Thanks for having me again. Appreciate it.
There you go. There goes Morgan Fox, the communications director of the NCIA. It is 4:20 on Friday afternoon, maybe a little bit late. We usually take our break at this time. That's exactly what we're going to do to celebrate that momentous time of day that people in the cannabis community embrace. It did all start with the Waldos at San Rafael High School back in California. And interestingly enough, there was a Grateful Dead connection to the 420. One of those Waldos, I believe it was Dave, was friendly with Phil Lesh, who was the regular, an original member of the Grateful Dead. And it just so happens the Garcia handpicked van was in Massachusetts this week. I got to go down there and hang out a little bit with those people. And that was very cool to do that. So let us take a break. We salute, maybe not with a Grateful Dead song, but we always salute the 420 time frame with my favorite song, my song that had the same impact. It's Shanty. It's by Jonathan Edwards. We'll be back with a great panel of guests and a very important announcement at 5:30 live on this show where you can win a great prize. I'll explain in a little while. Don't go away.
Yeah, this is a tune that I wrote back in 19... I've forgotten. We had a saying in our old band, one of my first bands in 1966 or so. What are you going to do tonight? Oh, just, like every other night, just going to lay around the shanty and put a good buzz on. Gonna sit down in the kitchen, fix me something good to eat. Make my head a little high, make the whole day complete. Gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. Pass it to me, baby, pass it to me slow. We'll take time out to smile a little before you let her go. We're gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. You're on something. Go ahead. Rick Brodsky, everybody. There's nothing to do and there's always room for more. Fill it, light it, shut up and close that door, baby. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Take it, okay. Prohibition never works, it's time to realize it. It grows in my backyard, it's time to legalize it. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. I'm gonna sit down in my rented car. I'm gonna jam it into drive. Gonna head on out and play at WSCA with Sean. I'm glad I'm alive. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on every night and day. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on.
Hi, I'm Ben Shire, New England rep for Salient Video Management Systems. Let me tell you what makes us different in the security space. We're your trusted advisors for all your security needs. I know how complicated the regulations are in cannabis, and working with Salient Systems will be the polar opposite of that. I give free consultations and will walk you through every step of the process so that you can get what you need at the price you can afford. We're robust, we're simple and scalable. We're Salient Systems, your solutions to all your security needs. Please contact me at the information below, and I'm looking forward to being your trusted advisor.
Okay, welcome back to a live edition of the Green Rush, the business of cannabis. We run it here every Friday live from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern. I'm Jimmy Young with Pro Cannabis Media, and I'm always joined by my sidekick.
David Rabinovitz.
There he is.
That's my two lines in the whole show. I can now go to sleep, everybody.
That's not true. You do a very valuable job because you monitor the chat room, which is over there. And you can imagine if it's about 15 feet away and the font is about this size, there's just no way I can see it. So I appreciate David monitoring that and appreciate all three of you for coming on today. I want to mention Deborah Borchardt is here, a regular on our Weed Talk News. Deborah, thank you so much.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
She, of course, has created the Green Market Report and is one of the most respected journalists as far as the business of cannabis goes. I could also say the same for the other two gentlemen in our forum this afternoon. One is Jeff Smith. He is the legal and regulatory reporter for MJ Biz Daily. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here.
And I also want to welcome in Jay Rosenthal. He is from O Canada. And Jay, as I find out, is co-founder and president of the Business of Canada. And Jay, you're from Massachusetts. How in the heck did you end up in Toronto, Canada, in the cannabis business? That's the first question.
Well, I'll start at Natick High. Emphasis on high. I did go to Natick High for all those people in Massachusetts, but also I fell in love with a woman from Toronto. And that's how many Americans end up here, that and the Vietnam War.
That's
A
right.
lot of other Americans ended up here.
Are you old enough to even remember the Vietnam War, Jay? Come on.
No, but there are people here who have been here since then.
Okay.
I'm sure of that.
Yes. David, let me ask you, did you ever get a draft card?
Me?
Yeah.
No, I missed it by just a couple of years. I mean, the
Yeah.
fall of Saigon was 75, right?
Right.
I was 15
Exactly
years
right.
old.
Exactly right. I'm 63. My brother had got a lottery number, and that was as close. He's 5 years older than me. But let's talk about some cannabis business. I'm going to start with Deborah, because there was a major business story this week with Trulieve and Harvest getting together and merging and acquiring each other. Tell me a little bit about that Trulieve merger, Deborah.
It's just a sign of the continuing trend of consolidation we've been seeing, where the big are getting bigger and gobbling up really kind of what I consider maybe problem children. I was a bit surprised by them picking up Harvest Health. Trulieve is mostly centered in Florida, but they have really made a move in the last few months of expansion into other states. And so they picked up Harvest Health at a valuation of $1.2 billion, which seems a little rich. Having said that, when they combine with Harvest Health, they'll have 126 dispensaries. They'll be in 11 states, over 20 cultivation type facilities. So they're going to be a huge, huge company. Trulieve is run very well by Kim Rivers, and she's done an amazing job. One of the few female CEOs that are out there that's hung in. And, Trulieve puts up some massive numbers every quarter. I think the last quarter they just did 198 million in one quarter. They're also profitable, which is also rare among cannabis companies because of 280E. So they're just really crushing it. Having said that, Harvest Health is, like I said, it's a bit of a problem child. They've got a bunch of lawsuits all over the place. None of them are all that huge, but it's just a trail of little niggly lawsuits. And then they have liabilities. Their total liabilities are $500 million, 500 million in total liabilities. That is a lot. And so I was just, I'm sure in all the dirty details of that contract, of that acquisition, that there's something to be said about all those liabilities. I can't imagine that they're just going to take them at face value. I'm sure they're going to try to talk them down.
Jeff, what's your impressions of this particular merger by Trulieve?
Well, I think like Deb said, I think a lot of people are a bit surprised that they're taking on Harvest with all that debt. But Trulieve really, although they're a multi-state operator, in effect, they were really a single state operator. I mean, more than 90% of their revenues historically has been in Florida, where they have just an amazing dominant position. They still have like 46% of the smokable flower market and 42% of the milligram market. So they're really, this is a quick way for them to expand. Instantly, they'll be the market leader in Arizona because Harvest is the market leader in Arizona. And combined, they'll have a huge presence in Pennsylvania. But still, I think people are surprised and they have some gaps. They won't have a presence in Illinois, which is a hot market. They won't have a presence in New Jersey and New York, which recently legalized adult use. So we'll just see how it plays out.
I think I saw something that the Florida medical community, medical marijuana card holding people in Florida, 600,000 patients.
It's number one in the country.
Yeah, I suppose
Pennsylvania is pretty close, but yeah, Florida's number one.
That's right. Hey, let's go up to the north of the border to Jay Rosenthal. And up in Canada, there seems to be some merger and acquisition going on up there as well. It seems like never a dull moment north of the border in Canada, where it is, of course, federally legal up there.
It is. And watching what sort of happens with Trulieve and Harvest, there is going to be this great land race, and it already is, right? It's like, how do you gain a foothold? Certainly in the Canadian front, like there's lots of publicly traded companies. Many of them have spent tons and tons and gobs of cash with very little to show for it, other than empty greenhouses that they want to try to move. But even the land race in the States, I mean, Hexo, which is one of our bigger companies up here, which has seen a huge run up, huge downfall. You know, their market share here is limited, but their beverage category is actually doing really well. Just today announced that they were acquiring a greenhouse in Colorado. So I think you're going to start to see a lot of people with infrastructure experience of sort of opening up big facilities that are here saying, you know what, the real opportunity is down there. And they see like a Trulieve looking at what they're doing with Harvest and saying, there is cash to be had down there. If we could build a foothold, if we could drive our stock price, we could actually gain bigger traction than if we took over all of Canada. If we could have a tiny slice of what's happening in Florida with those 600,000 patients, or have a foothold in New York or New Jersey or Illinois or Pennsylvania, like those states are just ripe for a land rush. And that's what you saw with Trulieve picking up what I think Deborah called a problem child asset. Like if a problem child asset gets you 1.2 billion, it actually makes the Canadian companies look great, right? Like, and the one thing I thought about with Trulieve and Harvest is that it's kind of like the Grapefruit League taking over the Cactus League. So there's a whole baseball analogy in there somewhere, I'm sure, as well.
And
I
Jay,
follow-
not to just point out, you know, your point about Hexo going into the States, there was just a forecast comparing the US markets and the Canadian markets, and the US market with New Jersey and New York is expected to hit 28 billion by 2024. And it's only going to be like 5.6 billion in Canada. So while the Canadian market's growing really fast, it's kind of leveled out at a level that's just way, way below the US.
Yeah,
so
totally.
the Canadian companies are going, yeah, I think we want to be over there.
Yes, yeah, they have to be. They have no choice.
David, you got anything for this group? You want to throw something out? I know you've got something. This is your perfect panel.
Well, as we were discussing this, Jimmy, my curiosity got the best of me, so I jumped on to Google. There's about 40 million people in California and just under 38 million in all of Canada. So when you look at Canada as a market and compare it to the size of California, I think it's like 11 people per square mile. I didn't get to how many people per square mile in California, but if I could be in all of Canada versus all of California, I think hands down California would win. Right?
Yeah, I would just say this though.
Deborah's not so sure about that.
I would just say this about that, that what some companies have done here pretty successfully is expanded their retail footprint to the 80, 100, 120 stores really quickly, and actually are really good operators at running retail. They don't have a cultivation footprint. They don't have a processing manufacturing footprint. They don't even have branded products. They have retail. And they've gone through the process of doing some really challenging regulatory stuff. And some of those retailers have cash to spend, whether they be High Tide or Fire and Flower, some of our bigger retailer footprints. And those people have the ability to, I think, gobble up retail in some of those states that are going to be challenging from a compliance perspective and a regulatory perspective, but they do have expertise in getting up and running scores and scores of retail stores. And I think that is a real land race in all those states.
The only reason I made that face was I spoke to a dispensary owner last week who has a place in California, and he said his dispensary was doing $150,000 a month last year. It's down to $56,000 a month because they're issuing so many licenses in California right now for new dispensaries that the existing businesses are starting to have to share that business. Having said that, a new Cookies just opened in Vegas this week. I don't know if you guys saw that. There were people camping out overnight. Overnight campers for the Cookies opening in Vegas. I couldn't believe it. I was like, what?
It's a cult.
My sister used to take my daughter on Thanksgiving night to go hang out so you could get the great deals. I hate retail, so I stay away from it. I can't understand why you would camp out to get a big screen TV for cheap. Never mind, go to a marijuana store just so you can be early in line.
And that's why you're not running a Cookies.
Yeah, well,
that's right.
We're making as much money as Berner is.
No, I could be
rem-
running it. I just couldn't be one of the customers standing out there overnight in order to buy something that you can probably buy the next day once the line goes down.
Who's the closest to their 20s in this forum? That's what I'd like to know. Because when you're in your 20s, you don't think about that. You just do it.
Absolutely.
And who
Jeff-
knows, maybe they were giving something away to the first 20 people in the door, and Berner
Yeah.
was there. He came to cut the ribbon.
Yeah.
Ben Koplar was there from
It's an event.
Relief.
I think that people still have a sense of history. Jeff, as you listen to the banter we talk about over the first couple of minutes here on this show, what's your impressions about where or when might we reach a saturation point? Or is that so far in the future now that it's just a question of where if interstate commerce ever opens up?
I think it just, well, right now it just depends on the market. There's some markets that are still young and just growing like wild, like Pennsylvania's medical marijuana market. And, and then we have all these new adult use markets that are going to come online. So, gosh, I think there's just tremendous growth ahead still. And we still have some states that haven't legalized. And certainly a lot of states have not yet legalized recreational. So I think a lot of growth ahead.
Plenty of growth. And speaking of growth and exporting of the growth, Canada does have an opportunity to be a exporter because they seem to have a lot of extra weed hanging around. Is that accurate, Jay?
It's accurate. They have a lot of extra weed hanging around. People willing to, other markets to distribute it to are limited and have been limited. And they're up to the highest sort of standards. I mean, some of them are like EU GMP, like they could export it around the world. It's just the markets around the world aren't big enough to export it to. And some of the capacity that is being grown here is just not great. Like consumers aren't buying it. Like they're buying great flower. They're not buying necessarily crappy flower, just like anywhere else. So the crappy flower is either being tossed or extracted or put into other products. But I don't want to change the subject, but I do want to go back to the previous subject and what you were talking about with the Grateful Dead, actually, as you were leaving the last thing. And it actually talks about Berner and cookies, because I think it is actually a really important point about success of retail. And Berner and cookies are so on top of where the cannabis culture is, like they are crushing it. There's no doubt about that. But Berner did a set with Bob Weir of the Grateful Dead over quarantine. So like, the idea that cannabis retailers or people who are developing brands are so in tune with their very specific audience, but also the crossover audience, like people like Berner and what they're doing to cookies are just like, I'm not saying they're playing on another level, but they are much more in tune with the people that they are serving than we are. So why would you wouldn't lay out on the grass, on the strip to buy weed at cookies? Because you can buy it at Planet 13, 2 seconds away. But there's something happening with cookies and some other retailers too, that they're just in tune with what's happening. And it's not like, we don't need to understand why, we just need to understand that it actually is happening. And smart money is following people, I think, in any industry that know exactly what their consumers want. And cookies knows what people want.
I think it's interesting that you bring up the Dead, and I love talking about the music socialization aspect of this plant, and that plays right into the culture that exists. And I think everyone in this panel knows there is that market that exists. The emerging market, the 50+ market, is still the fastest growing demographic in the cannabis space, but it hasn't really centralized yet. Where do you guys think that market is going to be? I know one thing: if you're 50+, you're not camping out outside of cookies to get weed. You're just not. No, you're not.
If you did.
I mean, maybe a collector's item. I get it, right? I mean, I can see that part, but beyond the collectible, okay, to actually just get the product, maybe I'm naive, because that wouldn't surprise me. Deborah, what do you think about the emerging market, that 50+ market? How long might it take, or has it already arrived in the more mature states that have cannabis available to adults?
It's definitely there. There are dispensaries, I don't want to say that cater to that audience, but are certainly not the, Dr. Green Thumb, B Reals dispensary, which, is he was it from Cypress Hill, or is still in Cypress Hill. So you've got, like Jay was saying, you've got that element of the, very much embracing the stoner rap culture. But then you've got the other side that when you go to those dispensaries, they're very earthy, and they might have a lot of plants on the wall, and there's a lot of wood trim inside, and they're very mellow. And so you're starting to see this, to me, this breakdown in dispensaries of who's choosing their audience. Are you going to be, the Abercrombie and Fitch or the Hollister that goes after a certain crowd in the mall? Or are you going to be Macy's? And we are starting to see that diversification within the dispensary lines, because they're certainly choosing their mood and their look and feel, and they're very specific. They're carving out very specific things. And when I look at Dr. Green Thumb, very similar to the whole cookies burner thing. It's certainly going for that. And you may draw in the 50 plus because they may want to feel cool by going to these things. Some people don't like the slickness of a Planet 13. Last time I was in Vegas, goodness, there was a line to get into the Reef, which was across the street from another dispensary that no one was going to. And I thought that was fascinating to see a lot, like two dispensaries across the street from each other and a line at one and not at the other. So there is something to be said about the branding.
It's going to be, the word fascinating always seems to be attached to the cannabis industry. There's so many applications to that going on, both on the political scene, on the federal legalization scene, and then, of course, the medical community as well. There's so many things that we're still learning about this plant. Jeff, in your estimation, and I know the MJ Biz fact book is out there, and they love to put out the projections of where the market is going and that sort of thing. Where is the biggest growth, if you will, in the cannabis space? Are we going to see it more on the research side, the growing side, or retail? And is retail just still simmering below the surface, do you think?
That's a great question. I would say that the retail side it still has a lot of room to grow, grow. But of course, having said that, as more states become adult use, they also, the medical marijuana industry declines. So there is some offset there, but I think retail's still got a big runway for growth, and probably, other aspects of the business, of course, as well, along with that.
Yeah. And I wonder if there'll ever be, I don't want to say a clash, because I'd like to think that everybody who's in this space can actually get along, but there are still some dispensaries that have a medicinal only focus. And then, of course, they're still looking to get an adult use license because of kind of what you just said, Jeff, because, the retail is still the boom market. If I was an investor, right, it's the upside. Will we ever see, and I'm going to throw this out to everybody, will we ever see a wholesale market that might be traded as a commodity on the futures market? Will we ever see this in cannabis?
Yes.
Deborah says yes. Go ahead.
Oh, yes, I think ultimately that's where, there already is a wholesale market that exists now.
Right.
Certainly that's where some of the money is being made, and some of the cannabis companies you're seeing are making a decision. Some are going all in for wholesale because they're making more money wholesaling. They're, as Jay said, these giant greenhouses full of weed, and they got to get rid of it, and they can't sell it under their own label. So they just start white labeling it for, whatever rap star walks in the door. You have some that have pulled away from wholesaling that wanted to go full on retail. But yeah, I definitely think I think that wholesale market's going to be pretty strong. It's already strong in New York, which they don't talk about a lot, but Etain sells her cannabis to several of the dispensaries in New York already. So she's already wholesaling.
And of course, we're just talking about the markets inside each state because the borders have not been opened yet. A little different in Canada, though, isn't it, Jay?
Yes, but there's a wholesale market because there's extra product, and I think it's, you know, you think about more mature industries, and I don't know if you know where the hops that go into the beer you like are grown, or you know how they make, you know, where the products that go into the whiskey you like to buy. Like it's we're not there yet, but we're going to be there, because where I think the even bigger growth than retail, bigger growth than cultivation is brands, right? Brands that can cross states. I mean, not that it doesn't matter what goes into those brands, especially flower. Like flower, it's going to matter where it's grown, how it's grown, but finished products, beverages, edibles, vape pens, like all those things, like the brands are there in some of those states and have huge market share. But like when it actually opens up and you can buy the same exact thing in New York as you can in San Francisco, as you can in Miami, that we are, I mean, I think a long time from that in terms of consistency, in terms of supply, in terms of supply chain, but that is a massive growth market, just like it probably was when people started drinking soda, right? Like there was no Coca-Cola, there was just little teeny soda shops around the world. And all of a sudden there's Coke and it's everywhere and it's all the same all the time. We're not there yet, but when that happens, it'll matter that Hexo bought a facility in Colorado, but not nearly as much as that whoever's the biggest wholesaler can sell to everybody everywhere to create the same products. And like, that is probably the biggest growth yet to happen. And that's exciting to watch because it's all ahead. And just on that note, like, you know, Canada is legal nationwide. It's available, you know, a lot of places. Yet there's one brand that dominates. I just got the list from our partners at Headset about the top selling edibles brands in the three biggest provinces. It's Wana Gummies, which is a US brand, but it's licensed here. Bang Chocolate, US brand, licensed here. And I think Chowie Wowie, also a US brand, licensed here. And of the top three, and those top three, like 8 of them are one of those products, and they're all brought here by one company. So like the brands are starting to have this feel, but like consistency about what's happening here versus there, like it's still really an open playing field. And that is like, there's going to be a boom and it's great. There will probably be cookies too. I mean,
and you mentioned Bang Chocolate, Jamie Pearson, their founder or CEO or whomever. I've been able to interview her a couple times. She's great. And one of Jim Belushi's favorites of chocolate too, if you saw that, if you saw his little special. David, you got something you want to throw in here? I'm waking you up, I hope. No, you got to unmute. Got to unmute David, unmute David.
I know that, Jimmy. Keep going.
Oh, all right. I got to ask Jeff, you know, you told me before we came on that you work for the Portland Press Herald in Maine, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Do you know what they've done with the building that you used to work in?
You know, I think I did hear. Did they turn it into a boutique hotel?
Yes.
Yeah.
So you could actually go hang out, pay to go, you know, overnight in the office where you worked.
Yeah, it was a grand building. I'm a little sad to hear that.
I know, and it's how I feel about the Boston Globe too on Mercy Boulevard, because I did get a chance to work there for a couple of years as well. We're getting up closer and closer to the end of the hour. What's the biggest challenge ahead of the cannabis businesses, not just here in the States, but perhaps everywhere around the international market? Jeff, is it going to be continuing to try and drive social equity to get access to capital? Is that still going to be the biggest story moving forward?
Well, certainly states that are legalizing social equity is a big piece, but no one has really figured out yet how to do it well. So that's going to be interesting to watch.
Well, we figured it out.
We really can bring in equity into the industry.
Right. David thinks that Massachusetts has figured it out. Is that
right?
Oh,
no. I said we have figured it out. It's the state regulators that are so deep into some of their other issues. They just can't seem to get their heads up to figure it out.
I'm not quite sure if they're actually getting input from the community. That's what I want to hear, that they're actually listening to the people that have an opportunity to change their lives. That's what I am waiting to see. Deborah, as you look into your crystal ball, the future of the cannabis business in the United States, first of all, what's your feeling? Are we going to see any kind of descheduling, legalization. You know, a couple of Republican House members filed a bill this week. What do you think is going to happen in the future here for the cannabis business?
I just don't think that we're going to see federal legalization in the near future. Maybe some kind of decrim federally or something like that. I think they'll tiptoe into it. I don't think we're going to see a big move. I really think that we're still going to see within the cannabis industry a challenge between the illicit market and the legal market. I think that that's just going to continue to bedevil the legal markets. Particularly, I think we're going to see that happen in New York. We've certainly seen it happen in California. And I just think that's just going to continue to be an issue. And if Texas ever moves forward, which Texas is way behind, and I'm originally from Texas, and let me tell you, people smoked weed there like crazy because they got it from Mexico. So it was the first stop on the way into the US. So it's a very, it's just ingrained in the culture down there. And yet legally, they're still acting very conservatively. So that's also a state that's got a very strong illicit market. To me, that's going to be the biggest challenge going forward, is trying to tamp that down.
Jay, as someone who watched the Canadian federal government legalize and go into business of cannabis, what's your impressions of what you think might happen in the United States, and what would you like to see happen in the States versus perhaps the Canadian model?
Well, I'd like to see it be chaotic as it is, because that's, I think, good for Canadian companies. But so one thing Deborah said, like, it's really difficult to tamp down, tame, whatever, people who like getting their cannabis through their dealer, right? That's really hard. There are defined supply chains, defined ways to get it to customers, and bringing legacy growers into the legal market, trying to convince someone to pay taxes, adhere to burdensome regulations, security, paperwork. Like, it's a really difficult challenge. We see it especially on the west coast of Canada, just like they do in the Emerald Triangle in California. It's really difficult to bring in legacy growers. That's really hard. They have a pretty great business going right now. And it's not just in one state, it's in lots of states. So that's like definitely one challenge. I think the bigger challenge writ large is that there's no foreseeability, right? Business school 101, the first day, businesses like foreseeability. Like, you can't tell me today, the day New York, the first 10 dispensaries are going to open. If you don't know that, like, how are you going to plan a business around that? At that times, the next 35 states to go legal, plus all the regulations on a local level, like, it is a hodgepodge. Obviously, the federal government, let's just be kind, because I'm American, but living here, like, it hasn't moved smoothly. Like, there's a lot, like, you could have 90% agreement among the population of the US that legalization is a good idea, and it still won't move in the Senate, right? Like, these things are wild, right? So, or think the previous guy said weird. Politics are weird. So I think that the lack of foreseeability on when, how, what regulatory framework will exist will be a real challenge to deal with. It is not for the faint of heart. It is for people who know how to be patient while being impatient and growing. Like, the fact that Hexo bought a facility in Colorado without knowing where the future, this is wild money going after a land race with no end in sight. And like, that's why I think we all like this, because it's fun to talk about that. But if you were thinking about planning an industry for the next 10 years and that was the road ahead, people would think you should choose another line of work.
Right. Absolutely. Hey, Jay, it's been awesome talking to you, not just now, but also before. And I look forward to continued conversations with you. Jay Rosenthal is the founder and president, co-founder of Business of Cannabis. And you can certainly Google him, link in with him. He's easy to find. Deborah Borchardt, The Green Market Report. Subscribe, like, and share. And of course, follow her on Weed Talk News, which, by the way, follows this live stream at 6 o'clock, like we do every Friday. And Jeff Smith, great to get to say hello to you and reminisce a little bit about the days when we both cut our teeth in Portland, Maine. So
right.
Again, thank you. Keep up the good work with MJ Biz, and we'll see you in Las Vegas. That's for sure.
Yes, definitely.
Because that's going to be a great show in October down there in Las Vegas. And we're all hopeful we'll be healthy and down there, and we can social distance and still socialize.
And then you could bring your sleeping bag and sleep out for cookies.
No, but that's okay. Jay, great stuff, man. Thank you all for coming. We've got another great panel coming up. Don't go away. Plus our special announcement coming up at 5:30. Don't miss that. We continue with Green Rush Live after this break. Hi, Jimmy Young here, and I have to ask you, are you secure? If you're in the cannabis industry, you have to have security for your grow facility or dispensary. And we are so happy to welcome Salient Systems to our group of supporters. You get to call their rep. His name is Ben Shower at SalientSys.com. So don't even wait an hour. Call Ben Shower at 413-333-7974.
Pro Cannabis Media original content is supported by Salient Systems, your trusted name in video surveillance for the cannabis industry. And by Revolutionary Clinics, Massachusetts' #1 medical dispensary where the patient comes first. And by Accounting Buds, getting your cannabis finances in the right order. And by Artery Pay. They demystify and modernize digital payments for cannabis. And by YourStory.com, award-winning storage solution for the discriminating cannabis consumer.
I really enjoy what I do. There's a couple different reasons for it. First of all, I've always been an accountant, and it's kind of a nerdy thing to say, but I do love accounting. And I also love helping companies. I love helping people build their companies, especially small to mid-sized startups. I've always been someone that's, in all my roles in industry, it's always been building teams, building companies, building departments. And to be honest, I love working for myself and owning my own company. So I love what I do every day.
Well, all right. We are back for the final hour of our Green Rush Live. It's the business of cannabis. We do it every Friday on our Pro Cannabis Media Content Distribution Network, on all your social media platforms, on our Roku channel that you can still find on the streaming channels opportunity on Roku. And again, my name is still Jimmy Young. I'm with Pro Cannabis Media, and I'm still joined by my friend
David Rabinovitz.
There you are, David. David, do you want to tell people what exactly you do? Do you want to tell? Come on, promote
I just
yourself a
help
little
you
bit.
co-host this show.
Yeah, come on. You do a few other things out there
I
too,
do
don't
a
you?
few
Come
other
on.
things. We'll save that till the end. Let's.
All right. Oh, God,
we got
yeah.
great guests on today. Let's get
Yes,
to them.
we do, and I'm going to introduce them all. First of all, we welcome back two people. Rick Thompson is here from the Michigan Cannabis Business Development Group. Always a pleasure, Rick. Good to see you. He's also the host of, what is it, the Jazz Cabbage Cafe every week? Is that what it's called?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
And by the way, I didn't have a script. I actually remembered that. Edmund DeVoe is here. He's the president of the New Jersey Cannabis Business Association. Edmund, great to see you again. Matt Simon from the Marijuana Policy Project Northeast. Matt, great pleasure to see you as well. And I want to welcome in Tom Nolasco, who's the Director of Legal and Strategic Initiatives for the National Association of Cannabis Businesses. Tom, thank you so much for joining us here on Friday, our Green Rush show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Well, I know some of you have been listening. Some of you may not have been, which is okay. We just had a great panel. Also had a tremendous discussion with Morgan Fox from the NCIA. And I think this is a perfect time to bring and talk to Matt Simon about the news of the week that two Republican House of Representatives decided it would be a good time to enter into the cannabis legalization space and throw a bill out there. It just was missing one little thing in that bill, and that had something to do with social justice. Matt, what's your opinion of what happened this past week with that bill, and where do you think we are federally as far as getting any kind of legalization or decriminalization on the docket in Washington?
Yeah, I think I would echo what my former colleague Morgan Fox said. I think he pretty much nailed it across the board. I say that from the perspective of somebody who focuses almost entirely on state level politics. So I'm not in DC. I'm not talking to these folks. I'm reading articles and press releases just like everybody else and listening to people like Morgan who really know what's going on. But that seems to be, I think he nailed it on every front. And it's the same dynamic that we see in a lot of state legislatures, where once public opinion has shifted to the point where there is the mood or the pressure to do something, that Democrats and Republicans have pretty different ideas about what that something actually is. And the kind of law that you pass is often going to depend on who's in leadership, who's making those decisions, and who's on the sidelines.
Absolutely. Thank you. And of course, I know you're friends with Morgan, and I will never forget this quote. Politics is weird. Morgan Fox. I think that was brilliant.
He's so right.
It's so true. When it fits, right? Edmund, since New Jersey is new to the world of the cannabis world, can you bring us up to date on what's going on in that state and how soon? I know that Maplewood is welcoming a new medical dispensary. I think you're up to 17 now in New Jersey.
That's right. So things in New Jersey are happening. We're proud that the governor, the legislature, the public actually got around 5 commissioners for the Cannabis Regulatory Commission that everyone could get behind. So the commission was seated. They're meeting with the public. They're meeting within their own circles, and we're pleased that they appear to be making progress. We're proud of that. But in the meantime, we definitely are making progress because look, our medical community is here to stay. The medical community does not go away just because you have adult use. And so the notion is let's serve the medical population, the medical clients, which are now around 110,000 in the state of New Jersey. And so the expansion of the medical industry is something we can get behind. It is happening. And you know what, there's still more room. So we really do look forward to growing both in an expanded medical market as well as the adult use.
Tom, as someone who has a legal background, let's just say, there's this discussion, and we were having a little bit of it, medical versus adult use. You know, I think people understand that there are medicinal qualities to this plant. It has been proven time and time again now through research and science, and of course, there's thousands of anecdotal stories about this as well. But from a business perspective, where are you seeing, obviously there's big money coming into the adult use side, but the medical community also has the advantage, I believe, of developing a research angle, perhaps. Tell me a little bit about the development of the businesses, medical versus that adult use in your idea.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, on a more national kind of general scale, I've had people approach me saying, one of the ways to get this federally legal, or at least to get kind of the sideline investors more involved, is to get the federal government behind research and development of the plant and get it into the universities. And you can follow the blueprint of this from the hemp side of things, right? I was on a panel with the Oregon Hemp Association where the universities in Oregon actually help do the certification programs for hemp. If we could get that on the medical side for marijuana, I think that'd be a nice shoe-in for that way. But your question, and I'm in Phoenix, Arizona, to bring the medical and the adult use, recreational, together. We were one. So Prop 207 came up last year, right? So we were medical since 2010. And then through that ballot initiative, we became recreational. The interesting thing in here in Arizona is an organization called the ADA, the Arizona Dispensary Association, was largely in control of how that ballot measure rolled out. And in Arizona, it's kind of the opposite of some states like Oklahoma, where Oklahoma, it's unlimited number of license. They kind of let the free hand of the market dictate who the successful license holders are going to be after the market bears it out. Here it's capped. And we essentially had for a long time 130 license holders, and that's it. And so there's a monopoly on that. And those same 130 dictated how recreational is going to roll out. So the only ones with the recreational licenses now are those same medical holders. So, I mean, that's how the rollout here is in Arizona. And we were one of the quickest and most efficient to roll it out.
Yep.
We had that ballot, the election in November. By January, we had rec sales going. Problem is, it's still in control of those same 130. So you have different states and different models doing it different ways. And then we have another 26 for social equity, right? That's coming. But that's how the medical and the recreational is rolling out here in Arizona. Not really that equitable.
Interesting. Let's talk about Rick. I'm going to bring you in here from Michigan for a second, because I love hearing from the different states, the different people that we get, because everybody's in a different stage of either their initial rollout or there's been a rollout for a number of years. Walk me through the temperature and the flavor of what's going on with the cannabis businesses in Michigan. Is everybody getting along? That's what I'd like to know.
Well, most of us are getting along, but there are some ne'er-do-wells like myself that always want to point out potential problems. Here in Michigan, though, we have a medical system that's really in decline. The recreational market, the adult use market, has really taken off, and we see a lot of retractions of participation from the medical program. People are not renewing their medical licenses in order to be able to distribute that way. Folks are not renewing their medical card holders, so they're losing some of their advantages and benefits there too. But typically, here in Michigan, we do see a different group of people that are operating some medical centers versus some legalization centers. But because we have a cannabis industry associations that seem to eclipse both shoes on the same body, by the way, the medical and the legalization. We have a good mix of people that are helping to direct the marijuana regulatory agency in the way that they're adjusting bills. We do have a lot of potential changes on the board already for 2021. There are maybe a dozen bills that are already introduced to do things like institute a nanogram driving limit or allow cannabis to be used by students at schools in the Michigan system. So there are quite a few different quote unquote fixes in the mix. Some of them are championed by one side, some by the other. So currently doing okay, but in the future, it'll be a little more combative.
I am shocked to hear that college students smoke weed. Okay. Shocked to hear that.
Well, actually that would be for elementary and high school students.
Okay, that's
Elementary.
A bit different. That's a little bit. Go ahead, David. I hear you.
The smoking, the purported smoking by elementary students of marijuana cigarettes was the basis for the LaGuardia report.
Well,
back in the 40s.
No smoking of marijuana by students.
That's what they found out.
It's all pills. It's all edibles and topicals. Things that would help to arrest seizure. Oftentimes vaporization, things of that nature. But there's no combustion for under 21 in Michigan.
Matt, as someone who's involved with the public policy of cannabis and you're in the trenches all the time, what's the go-to research that you guys cite on a somewhat regular basis? And what's your favorite or maybe the most recent research study that you saw that you find, again, kind of debunks a lot of the myths that have been around for like 80 years?
Oh, wow. It's tough to pick only one. I mean,
you got to have a favorite. You got to have a go-to. You got to have a go-to research, right?
Well, I mean, I'm here in North Carolina right now trying to help pass a medical cannabis bill. So I've been talking a lot about chronic pain and how the National Academy of Sciences came out in 2017 and admitted that cannabis is useful in treating chronic pain. You can't get any more credible to somebody who's a naysayer, who's looking for a reason to vote against medical cannabis, when the most comprehensive review that the federal government's ever done of cannabis research comes out and says that cannabis is useful in treating chronic pain, given the background of the opioid crisis and what so many patients and so many states have been through on that front, it turns a lot of heads and gets a lot of people to continue listening to what else you have to say.
Right. I get you. And I don't need to do this again, but I have done it many, many times. I've got horrible arthritis in my hands.
Right.
And it's how I didn't even need more than 10 seconds with the doctor to show him. I go, what do you qualify? And I said, well, really, do you need to see any more than this? Because I can't even make a fist with my hands. And yet I still managed to play tennis and golf, I might add too. Although I did have to get bigger grips on my golf clubs this year. I don't know if you care about that, but at least it's called adapting. And when you have to deal with chronic pain, it's a daily battle. It just is. You wake up and you are in pain, and you try to maintain a way to take the amount of CBD that I need to take every morning so I can get moving in the right direction. And a lot of people have to deal with it. And it's difficult to explain to people sometimes, but that is it. And by the way, I really don't partake until I'm off the clock. I go in with my CBD heavy tinctures in the morning. That's how I deal with it. And it does work, because if I miss a day or two, I wake up in the middle of the night in pain. And that sucks. And yes, I do forget things still, but that's another story. All right. I want to talk about associations, business associations. Okay. Dispensary associations. Yes, David, you're raising your hand. So I'm going to let you take this, because I think you know where I'm going with this. So
I do, but actually I'm going to throw something else out. This just flashed on my screen. The DEA has just begun issuing initial approvals for applicants for Schedule I cultivation licenses. And two applicants were approved today. Now, some of these people have been waiting since the Obama administration. That's major news if the DEA is finally going to allow people to grow marijuana for medical research, for general research, rather.
And Matt, I bet you know the other side to that story. I believe that they're limiting the THC content for these research. Is that something you've heard? Yes. Go ahead. Tell me.
I read that they've standardized the dose at 5 milligrams. I don't know what that means necessarily. I don't know if they're able to research higher doses than that, but it makes sense. I don't know. I saw the article, but I don't know the details.
We also, Rick, you shook your head there too. You've got a smirk. You want to say something. I know you do. Go ahead.
Dr. Sue Sisley frequently talks about the poor quality of cannabis coming out of the University of Mississippi, and how researchers really needed something, not just better quality, but something that more accurately reflects what's being consumed by Americans right now. And as Matt just said, a 5-gram dose limitation for medical testing doesn't really reflect the situation that our average consumer faces. Really doesn't.
No, it does not. They kind of fell a little short on that. I can tell you that. Let's talk about testing for a second. There was a lot of discussion in the last half hour about the illicit market versus the adult use legal market, the licensed market, if you will. As someone who grew up in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and the illicit market was the go-to way to get your product. It just was. When I started to hear about the advocacy of people like the Marijuana Policy Project and NORML, I was intrigued, because it was like, I really would like to know where my stuff comes from, and has it been tested, and how and what effect is it going to have on me? And it's one of the reasons why I treat it medicinally. I use it as a medicine, and I like being able to go to a medical dispensary and to get guidance on this, as opposed to the guy down the street. Will we ever get to the point? But the whole point of the legalization movement, I'm pretty sure, was to legitimize this, to bring it out, to get it tested, so we would know what's going on. Are we ever going to reach that point? Who wants to jump on that? Matt, you go ahead. I know you can talk about this.
I think that's certainly one of the major goals. To me, the first goal, and I started working on this 14 years ago when there were practically 1 million people, 1 million Americans being arrested for cannabis every year. So my first goal has always been to bring that number to zero, or as close to zero as we could possibly get it. And it's over time, as we've started creating legal regulated markets, that has increasingly been a point of emphasis for MPP and other advocacy organizations. How do we create a market that is truly much better than the market that it's replacing? Because if you don't create a better market, people are going to keep doing what they've been doing and buying what they've been buying. You have to create a market that consumers and patients want to buy from. And part of that is exactly what you talk about, having a source that you can trust, knowing the potency of what you're consuming, knowing that it's not covered in molds and pesticides and heavy metals and all these things that a lot of people aren't aware of or don't really think about. But awareness has come a very long way, I think, on that front. And that's one of the really encouraging trends that I see.
Edmund, you're shaking your head in agreement there. I mean, that's got to be what you're hearing in your neck of the woods too, in New Jersey.
Oh, absolutely. As a matter of fact, when we look at the anecdotal information, where at the time I was the policy advisor to the New Jersey Cannabis Business Association, people who were contemporaries of ours were talking about the fact that I want a legalized market because I don't want to go to the same person who's selling the product to high schoolers or even younger. And so when you look at that, I really do think that there is, as we saw by our election results, right? There's this overwhelming voter turnout that said legalize already, you know, for Pete's sake, legalize it. And so it comes from these adults who in fact see the value to a regulated, controlled market, to a safe product, and they advocate for that, and they voted for it. And so when we look at what's happening with the industry today, the same applies. People want to know where they're getting their product, that it is safe. And it brings up another point, and I'm sure we'll get to it later, in New Jersey. So we're faced with these municipalities that are now, quote unquote, opting out of the legalized program, right?
They're the NIMBYs, not in my backyard group, right?
So,
NIMBYs.
So NIMBYs. And you look at that, and there's two responses to that. One is, if you are not one of the only 3 of the 565 municipalities that voted, if you're not one of the 3 that your voting population actually voted down the constitutional amendment, then you're going against the will of the voters.
Right.
The other aspect is that if you have opted out, then all you have done is proliferated the illicit market, because it doesn't go away just because you have legalization. And if nothing else, it proliferates because you don't have the legal regulated choice within your borders. Now, people will go outside of their own town and they will go to regulated places, but it just doesn't seem to make sense to say no to, first of all, a program that's still being formed. But secondly, when you do have an opportunity to at least mitigate the illicit or unregulated market, why not do it?
Right. Absolutely. Tom, as a legal person, that was always the first thing that it crossed your mind when someone offered you something in the 70s, 80s, 90s. Oh, do I want to break this law by taking this joint and sharing it with others around me? Now that is starting to soften a little bit. First of all, I hear that the legal community, they don't want to be bothered by cannabis possession crimes anymore. What's your feeling about that?
Yeah, I think it's moved way beyond that. I mean, the trend now, particularly when you're looking at a lot of the social equity programs, is expungement, right? So right. if you were convicted of possession or transportation of, in Arizona, it's anything less than 2.5 grams, that's going to be expunged if you petition for it. And that's in fact one of the conditions, at least here in Arizona, that just came out, to become a valid social equity applicant. And then what you're seeing more on the national and the federal level, although the Biden administration is reluctant to talk about descheduling, decriminalization was something that he was actually willing to put on the actual platform and talk about. So yeah, I think it's well beyond that. And the fact that it's becoming kind of a hallmark for a lot of the social equity programs across the country, the trend is definitely going towards against that war on drugs mentality.
In the a lot of you are involved with associations, cannabis business associations. What are the advantages of joining an association of like-minded businesses? And are you seeing a sense of cooperation or competition amongst membership? Tom, I'll start with you because you've got the National Association of Cannabis Businesses. Is it cooperation or competition?
It's more cooperation, and the reason is pretty simple. A lot of our members want to be able to operate in different states, in multiple states, work into scale. That's how they grow their business.
Mhm.
And it's very difficult to do that when you have this patchwork across the country of different rules and regulations and laws. And to the extent that we create, we're an SRO, so I actually help draft a lot of our best practices and national standards based upon what's out there. If we can normalize things and make things easier for the businesses to follow regulation, that's what people are really after, and get some harmonization. It's not an easy task because there are so many different mindsets across the different states, but certainly that's a common interest for businesses where they're not. It is a highly competitive industry, but that's certainly a common goal.
Help me out with the acronym SRO.
Self-regulatory organization. So we create the best practices, the business responsibility, ethical thing to do, and we expect our members to follow that.
Edmund, are we cooperating or competing down there in New Jersey? It's too early in the game, isn't it?
Well, it's an interesting take in New Jersey. Look, nothing is easy in New Jersey. So that's first and foremost. But look, what we've experienced, right? The New Jersey Cannabis Association, we were the first and we remain the largest trade association in the industry. Now, there have been others that have cropped up, and they're somewhat muted, I think, so we don't have competition. And they're muted only because their interests have never been about the industry. So when you look at what we do and we talk about the industry, and the fact that we have current license holders that are members, we have those who want to be license holders, those who touch the plant, as well as all of the ancillary businesses. We are about the industry. So all the other, and when I say all, there's only like 2 or 3 that have cropped up since, but they have been so narrowly focused that the industry conversation seems to be ours. And we have such great support, not only from the legislature, but from the cannabis community at large. And recently, we were able to announce that we formed a strategic alliance with economic justice organizations. These are the NAACP, Sanitation and Social Justice. We have a alliance with the Camden Business Association. So there are business associations that are joining us because, as I've called us a couple of years ago, we are the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce. And people see us as this commercial voice. Because look, at the end of the day, the conversation of social justice, economic parity, and commerce are not only singular, but you don't have good economic policy if it does not incorporate social justice and conversations of parity. So we're, as the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, we've been very fortunate in that we have stood kind of apart from everybody else because we've got that conversation down pat.
And Rick, Michigan, competition, cooperation.
Big time cooperation. What we see is we've got a relatively mature market since we've been doing medical legitimately since 2009, and a gray market since 2016 as a business entity, and in 2018 from legalization. So we're seeing not only do we have strong statewide cannabis trade organizations, we also are breaking into regional trade organizations now with a West Michigan trade organization. We're also breaking into industry-specific trade organizations too. The value of the initial trade organization, which was a big umbrella, was huge because it helped to define policy moving forward. It gave the industry a voice. And one thing that's oftentimes lost in this discussion is the fact that legislators don't spend time becoming experts at cannabis. Legislators look to the cannabis industry to provide experts that can speak to things like social equity, like capitalization difficulties, like why we have so many different communities opting out in Michigan and in New Jersey apparently too. And we're not the only states that have that local problem. So when we look at cannabis trade associations, the value that they bring is from the togetherness that they create. Plus, parties. So, cannabis trade association parties are notoriously fun. That's all I'm going to say. I see Edmund laughing a little too hard there. He knows what I mean. Let me speak to something we talked about a moment ago, though, too, and that's the American cannabis experience. Remember, everybody, that Prior to legalization of medical or recreational, cannabis was monstrously popular in the United States of America. People that smoked cannabis and used cannabis in various forms never had it tested. There were no demonstrable health concerns. When we adopted legalization of medical, when we adopted legalization of adult use cannabis, a certain percentage of users, primarily new users, are very focused on testing. But the vast majority of people that use cannabis used it when testing wasn't available, and therefore they don't value that service. Testing is something mandated by communities and by states, and it's valuable, don't get me wrong. But when we talk about the value to the industry, it's not people using cannabis now because they feel safe about it. The industry is composed of people who felt safe about using cannabis before testing even existed.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, as I look at the clock now, I've been teasing that we have a major announcement at 5:30. And before we go to the major announcement, I'm going to tell David, you've heard me ask about state associations and dispensary associations, business associations. Here in Massachusetts hasn't been so smooth. When we come back from this big announcement, I'd like you to give a little background on what's been going on in Massachusetts with the associations. And perhaps it's not as cooperative as many would like. Let's just leave it at that. In the meantime, now it's time to explain. We are going to be running a contest. It's the first time in Pro Cannabis Media's history, granted, it's 2.5 years, okay, that we've ever run a contest. And the contest is going to be soliciting the public to tell us your cannabis story. Now, what does that mean? It means it's your cannabis story. It's your story. You get to decide what you decide to share with others. You go onto our website. There's a landing page. We're going to be giving away prizes every month on the Green Rush Show. A T-shirt will be available for 5 finalists. And then of those 5 finalists, we're going to have a very special prize. Now, to hear more about this contest, you're going to hear from me, but you're going to hear it on tape. We'll be back with more after this. Hi, I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media. And you know, when I started Pro Cannabis Media 2 years ago, I wanted to make sure the cannabis industry had a professional outlet to share their stories in their own words. Now, since it all started with my podcast In the Weeds 3 years ago, I've done over 250 interviews. I've met some incredible people with a shared passion for this amazing plant. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard the line, cannabis has saved my life, cannabis has changed my life. Well, now it's your turn. We want to give you a chance to tell your own story. It doesn't even need to be related to the medicinal power of this incredible plant. Just to give you a little incentive, we will pick 5 stories to share on our live Green Rush show on Fridays at 4 p.m. Eastern. If we share your story, you automatically get one of our t-shirts with that closing line I use all the time. It's a whole new world of weed. But as the legendary Billy Mays used to say, that's not all. One of those finalists will win one of these really cool full-story cannabis storage units. It's a great way to store your cannabis in their food-grade aluminum containers. It's award-winning, child-proof, smell-proof, and has a solid contemporary design. It's a $220 value, but you can win one if we pick your story and feature it on our show. Yes, we will pick one of those 5 finalists, and they will receive this $220 value absolutely free. Now, we ask you to keep your story to under 90 seconds on video and less than 500 words in text. So come out of the cannabis closet and tell us your story, and you could win with yourstory.com. Just go on to procannabismedia.com and sign up today. You might even join us on one of our shows. All right. Well, we're back. Green Rush Live. I'm Jimmy Young, and this is the whole thing. It's What's Your Story with a Y, and you can win with yourstory.com. Yourstory.com is part of a company called RCU, the Responsible Cannabis Use, rcu.org, and Pro Cannabis Media has teamed up, and we want you to tell us your story, and you can win with your story. And what is it all about? Well, you know what? Everybody has a story when it comes to cannabis. Everybody has an opinion about it. And Lord knows there's plenty of edible stories out there too. They could be funny. They could be silly. They could also be the ones that we've heard over and over again. cannabis has saved my life. Cannabis has changed my life. Cannabis has cured my seizures, my chronic pain. I use it for whatever ails happens to be on a program that you're looking to get away from. So that's what this story is all about. This is the storage device. It's the big prize here. And now, Dan, you can obviously come back to me. Obviously, I've got this is food grade aluminum canisters here. There we go, food grade aluminum right there for your various sativas, your indicas, what have you, for the discerning cannabis connoisseur. Rick Thompson probably knows this is going to be his bonus, his holiday bonus for the year, for helping us out with Weed Talk News.
Need more jars.
There you go, plenty of jars, and they've got these also these canisters as well, where you could put your various hash or your sativas or your indicas or your hybrids and pre-rolls. It fits a pre-roll in there as well. And, this is where we're going to give it away. And I really do want to thank Afshin Musavian, or Musavian, sorry, who's the CEO of RCU, Responsible Cannabis Use, and the group out of Canada that is doing this promotion for us. There's a landing page that's ready to be used on our website. Go to our website, find that landing page, and give us your story. You can upload a video, or you could just write a text to us, and we look forward to hearing the stories. Now, I'm guessing people in this room have a cannabis story, and at the end of this half hour, we'll come to you guys if you'd like to share your cannabis story. And by the way, it could be boring. Maybe it's just, it's my job, I'm doing it. Whatever it is, we want to have you share your stories as well. Now, David, I've heard your edible story, but as I said before the break, I want to talk a little bit about the spirit of competition versus cooperation here in Massachusetts. Talk to me, enlighten the audience, especially those in our panel here, about what has been going on in Massachusetts when it comes to this little battle that's going on. Go ahead.
Sure. So Massachusetts, as many of you know, legalized adult use recreational marijuana in 2016. Our industry got up and standing late in 2018, first on the East Coast. Great aspirations. We baked social equity right into the law, but we baked it in at the state level. We didn't bake it in at the local level. And in order to get to the state, you have to go through local approval. So if the local gatekeeper, who really isn't the gatekeeper, I'll talk about that in a moment, but if the municipalities that are the local gatekeepers don't care about social equity, it kind of falls apart. So what the Cannabis Control Commission did was realizing that they weren't getting traction with social equity. They opened up another license class for home delivery, and they made that exclusively available to social equity, whereupon the larger operators began to prey upon the social equity applicants. Things like, you need an agreement from a retailer to be a courier. And if you want to do business with me, I want 9.99% of your business, and I don't want you to do business with anybody else. I don't know how many of you have took courses in economics in college, but pricing power means if you only have one customer, but they have multiple suppliers, you don't have a lot of leverage. So a group got together with the social equity applicants, went to the commission, and the commission broke the license in two, which caused a huge uproar. So we have couriers that look like Uber delivering pot for marijuana retailers. And sometime this month, we have an application that's going to become available. The window will open. They announced it yesterday at the commission meeting. And these are marijuana home delivery operators. So they can buy product wholesale, inventory it. A consumer can't come into their business, but they can take orders online and sell direct to consumer like a mini Amazon. That's caused all kinds of problems with deals like, we have a huge problem with predatory deals. In Edmond, you're going to see that in New Hampshire. It's coming your way.
New Jersey,
New Jersey, right. You're going to see that because I'm talking to I set up a private panel next week with one of the leading editors in New Jersey who's writing a story about some of the predatory stuff that's happening in your state and wanted to reach out to us to get a preview for what they ought to expect. Things like, it's a 3-year exclusivity period. I'll give you a contract, I'll fund you, but when the 3-year exclusivity period is up,
I have an option to buy a controlling interest in your company. Or maybe I've got the option to buy the whole company. Or, boy, Rick, you think somebody should get a picture of the look on Rick's face now and in about 40 seconds. Or better yet, are the deals that say you own 51%, but we as the MSO have pure operating control. And then they bake these provisions into documents that hopefully will slide past the Cannabis Control Commission. They won't see it, whether it's in an operating agreement or something else. And I know of some recent ones that have gotten approved where they're approved and the Cannabis Control Commission isn't necessarily catching that kind of stuff. So what happened is our legacy association, the Commonwealth Dispensaries Association, put together by the 25 largest vertically integrated medical operators, because our medical program said you had to be vertically integrated. The adult use program is totally broken apart. You can be only retail, only grow, only manufacturing, only delivery. So the big guys are in the CDA, and those are the ones that got the head start, because interestingly enough, right? Economics rules everything. And I've seen it even within social equity, right? You'll have people of a minority race who are saying, let me help you out. And I've been on some of those discussions, and then watch when it comes time to start talking about what it's going to cost for that handout. It is very, very expensive. So the predators are all around coming at people from every direction, right? So the CDA decided to sue the state. There was such a huge backlash against the CDA. 20% of their members quit. A boycott was organized against anybody in the CDA. And if you're a CDA member, they've taken their website down to try to make their list private, because if you're a CDA member, you can't get into any of the local shows. The show sponsors have made an edict. They won't allow CDA members to have booths. And some of our larger shows that are locally owned have gone that far. We've heard, while they won't go on record, we've heard pretty solid rumors about major shows saying to CDA members, I'm sending your money back. You can't have a booth at our show as long as you're a member of the CDA. So it's been real tumultuous. Our other association, which is the smaller one, is the Cannabis Business Association, the CBA, run by David O'Brien. And they're doing a great job. They're all for social equity. They're trying to put together a mentoring program, and they just sponsored a study that came out to talk about the big problem we're having up here, which has to do with the host communities. In order to get the approval, you need this thing called a host community agreement. Talk about financial molestation. You want the host community agreement. Even though the law says you can get 3% sales tax and you can require reimbursement for out-of-pocket costs for up to 3% of your revenue, they just help people forget about the 3%. Some of them have gone higher, and most of them say, look, we may not be able to figure out the cost, so we all agree you just pay us 3% anyway. And by the way, you need to pay $25,000 to this charity, $15,000 to that charity. And as of February of this year, it all ended up in the courts. So we've got 3 cases working their way through the courts right now about operator that got his local approval from the planning board, and then the mayor wouldn't give them a host community agreement after they had gotten the first stage of approvals. And their argument is the mayor doesn't have that authority. Our state Supreme Court, during oral arguments back in February, was incredulous that the Cannabis Control Commission thinks they can't regulate host community agreements, and that municipalities can somehow create, well, you have to donate. One of the judges actually said, so if I start a fund in my name and I'm a town, I could actually tell people you have to donate to me. The next case was one of the operators who got a bill for $30,000 because a group challenged the zoning. And because they're challenging, this particular operator said, if you want the $400,000, I need copies of the bills, because A, it's a public record, B, the law says it's a public record, and C, in order to get my license renewed, the Cannabis Control Commission says I have to give them that information. So give it to me. And the municipality is saying, no, we won't give it to you. And they're dreaming up these bizarre We have adverse impact because it's causing a problem with our youth. They can't document it and they can't prove it. So that suit's now going on. And then we have a third one with a medical operator who wants to convert to sell adult use. And they've been told, sorry, we won't allow you to convert unless you're going to move your facility someplace because of the way we've zoned it. So
Like
we
Arizona.
have what you guys are going to see soon, which is now all the corruption, which our state attorney general, who is rumored to be running for governor, has turned a blind eye. If you want help, with marijuana corruption, you need to go to the federal government. And they're the only ones that are going after people who are doing illegal things in Massachusetts. And today, the former mayor of Fall River was found guilty on 22 of 24 counts, right? That's all over the news. The only thing he got away with is he gets to keep the Rolex watch, basically, and he doesn't have to give his assistant half her salary back that he insisted, here's your salary, but you got to kick half of it back to me. I think those are the only two things he skated on, right?
Yeah, I'm
So,
sure she's thrilled about that too.
Matt,
Matt,
go ahead, jump in.
That was great. Look, I want to start with Matt, and then we'll go right
No,
around.
Edmund's got his hand up. He gets to go, and
I've lost control of the show. Go ahead, Edmund. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. Only, David, because you called us out. And I certainly hope that the person that reached out to you reached out because we took a stance in opposition of legislation. I forget whether it was Rick or Matt that talked about capitalization of the businesses being a challenge, but there was a bill going through the New Jersey legislature that said, oh, yes, you can invest in a minority-owned business and yet not only invest, and people were just blind to the fact that it is a loan. When I heard the MSOs testifying in favor of the bill, they kept talking about the fund. And I said, call it what it is. It's a loan. So not only are you lending the money and getting it back with interest, you then, according to the legislation, get equity in the license. How is it that you get that? I called, in effect, I think I said it in the last show, it's 21st century sharecropping. You are going after these minority license holders and you're holding them. There's nothing there. The cannabis regulatory commissions, be it New Jersey or any other state, is not equipped to oversee those private financial deals. I think they're horrible. And again, we are opposed to legislation that does not protect the license holder. What good is it if your 15-year mortgage balloons to a 30-year mortgage based on some of these agreements? So David, thank you very much. And I'm sure your conversation will be fruitful.
Let's go. Matt, go ahead. I know that you're chomping at the bit on this too, because this is what you do. Go ahead.
I'm not chomping so much as just nodding along to everything that David and Edmund have said. I was a member of the drafting committee on the Massachusetts initiative, and we were proud. It was the first of any state that legalized. It was the first to include specific social equity provisions in the law, but it was not a priority for most of the regulators, at least early on. They came to prioritize it later in the process, but it just can't be emphasized enough how much this has been a recipe for local extortion. And the case of the mayor of Fall River illustrates that, and it's getting a ton of attention now, which is great as a result of that conviction. And now we can stop using the word alleged corruption in that case. So we all knew that the evidence was overwhelming. But even if there aren't Rolex watches and $50,000 cash payments to the mayor going on, this requirement that you get a non-opposition letter from a municipality and that you then negotiate a host community agreement with the municipality before you can get a state license has just tremendously undermined the intention of the social equity provisions. It has been I think maybe the number one reason that has not borne out the way that it should have. And it's a cautionary tale for other states.
Yeah, we literally have some social equity applicants who have been told, just stay home. We're going to send you 51% of the profits. You'll own 51% of the business, and then we'll buy out a greater interest in 3 years. Just stay home. And we have a few people who've looked at it and said, wow, I'm going to make 7 figures just by my position.
And I can't say it's not, that it's short-sighted. It helps them individually. But when you're looking at the bigger picture, you're now taking a class of people who don't have friends who've got 250 or 500,000 that they can plunk down. They may not have their neighbor's father who owns a pretty good sized company, or the mother runs a business that they can turn to for advice. And you're not educating people who haven't had that kind of a regulated entrepreneurial background on how to run a business. It's that old adage that we've all heard. Teach a person to fish, they eat for a lifetime. Give them a fish, they eat for a day. And unless the people in the social equity program get into the business and learn how to run it themselves, all you're doing is it's like giving somebody a Snickers bar at 2 p.m. They're going to get a lot of energy, but in 45 minutes, they're going to come crashing down. What good did you really do?
Yeah, but the Snickers bar was really good. Rick, I know you're chomping. Go ahead.
Well, I think each individual state is its own crucible of democracy, and it's wonderful that we have 50 states that are all doing their own thing as far as where cannabis laws go. But I think there's a commonality. When we centralize cannabis regulation, we forget about the decentralized role that municipalities are going to play. David mentioned it earlier. They are the gatekeepers to most of these cannabis business proposals. If you don't have a local community that supports your business, you can't necessarily start there. But more importantly, social communities offer the greatest opportunity for social equity. We put Marijuana Policy Project, MI Legalized, Michigan Normal, we put social equity into our program here in Michigan in 2018, but it was a mention. It wasn't a fully developed program because at that point we weren't really sure what to do with it. And now the state has sort of fumbled on that program. And we see the greatest opportunity to help disadvantaged individuals with their cannabis licensure comes from municipalities, but nobody's talking to them, nobody's educating the cities, nobody's bringing them up to a standard of knowledge where they can effectively work as a group instead of individually sorting things out, but as a community of communities, so to speak, where they could really work out some of these problems and find best practices. And then also, I'm not sure if there are municipalities in Michigan that are looking at municipalities in Jersey or in Oregon or in California, which have already walked that path before, that might be able to profit from their experience and then avoid some of the pitfalls that those places have gone through. Ordinances have resulted in terrible lawsuits here in the state of Michigan, and it's almost bankrupt some cities trying to defend a poorly intended and poorly worded ordinance that was very restrictive for cannabis. So I think we really suffer as a nation for not focusing on municipalities more and focusing almost all of our attention on statewide regulation.
Tom,
I was just going to throw in a comment, Jimmy. The other issue is at the state level, the expertise becomes concentrated. Like in New Jersey, it's going to be in the CRC. The municipality is going to, the Massachusetts municipalities, we're primarily 351 communities, 290 something of them are towns. So you're talking about small forms of government. And I've listened to some of them. They throw their hands up like, we didn't ask for this to be dropped in our lap. We don't understand it. The state's giving us no support. And now we got to navigate through this with everything else we have to do to run a small municipality. It's a whole myriad of issues that have created this problem. The best thing that can happen in any state, based on what I've seen in Massachusetts, get more of the underdogs into that last connection with the consumer, right? The only thing that Amazon doesn't own in their process is the last mile. You can become an Amazon delivery service provider. You hire a bunch of staff, and those Amazon trucks that you're running is a private business, because that's the hardest part of it. When you have social equity applicants who are opening up retail stores or home delivery operators because they sell direct. Now these people have to buy product, and when they're looking to buy product, they don't turn to the MSOs and they don't turn to the big integrated operators. A lot of them are looking toward the independent cultivators and independent product manufacturers. I mean, if for any of you who are familiar with Black Wall Street and Tulsa back about 100 years ago, this is the same thing. When there is Massachusetts, if it actually takes hold, we're going to have a separate community within our cannabis industry that's going to be the social equity and economic empowerment players who are trading with one another.
So instead of saying I'm a grower and I'm being potentially locked out of the market, it's now I've got a whole section of the market that deals with the consumer. So they're in that last mile. And when they buy from me, it stands my business up. It's the best thing that any state can do is get more of the, whatever you're going to call it. Social equity seems to be the phrase of art, but getting more folks within those programs into that last mile, the connection to the consumer will get the social equity programs up and running.
All right, Tom, go ahead.
Just following up on that, what a lot of the city social equity programs are doing is they're writing into it, mandating this type of business incubator programs, because you're right, it needs to be, it's no surprise that a lot of these social equity applicants don't have the necessary business legal training to run this type of business. And there's a lot of capital and there's a lot of training that you need to be able to do it, so you're not relying on the MSO. Second, on the predatory contracts. So here, the Arizona Department of Health Services just rolled out the rules for our social equity, and it's kind of similar to a lot of other states, 51% ownership with someone that qualifies as a social equity applicant. What's surprising, and it's not just here, but in a lot of other states, there's no requirement that social equity majority owner continues to be that 51% owner after the license is awarded. Why isn't that in there? Why isn't that in every state? And that social equity applicant, they should have the right to sell out and cash out. I mean, that's everyone's right to do. But there still needs to be, I mean, you can get creative with it, right? You can still require another social equity applicant. And that's one way to prevent the MSOs from just taking over on those predatory contracts. The third thing, I mean, on the delivery services, the NACB, we had a social equity conference last year. I moderated a panel with a gentleman named Aaron Goins, who has an outfit called Emerald Turtle that I'm sure you guys are familiar with.
Familiar. He's a regular on this show, just for the record.
Yeah, Aaron and I speak almost on a daily basis.
Yeah, he was very angry with good reason. I mean, one of the things that stuck out to me, what he was saying when he's battling with the municipalities that David was talking about, he said he thinks he was banned by more than 100 municipalities for his delivery service. And the amount of time and lobbying that he had to spend just politicking each municipal place, I mean, what a nightmare. And he's a sophisticated business actuary from Wall Street. He sees the timeline, like most startups and businesses, you're not running a profit till you're late in year 2 or year 3. The exclusivity period's but 6 months. I mean, there's all sorts of problems that they've got to face getting this business off the ground. So it's good to hear some good news, or at least, you know, maybe equalizing the fight on what was, I'm sure it was intended, was a well-intentioned, you know, social equity program. But boy, there's a lot of problems with the rollout.
Well, my good, we're not going to cure them all, but I will say conversation and communication, something I value and practice on a somewhat regular basis, sometimes better than others, as far as the communication goes. But I want to thank everybody in the room here, and all this show has been outstanding. I really look forward to these Fridays because, you know, a lot of times I just get to sit back and listen to you all talk to each other and have an opportunity to share your feelings. And that's something that I really have enjoyed. And we do a great job of putting together really good, intelligent, sophisticated people who aren't just sitting here talking about how to get high and what's the best strain and, you know, decarboxylation and all those neat buzzwords that are out there that are a part of this industry now. These are real issues and they all affect businesses. And I think there's still a lot of interest, and it's still so early in the process of this. It's a fascinating time to be part of it. So I want to just thank, first of all, Isabel Turner, who books everybody in this room. I thank her almost every week. I appreciate that. Dan French, who directs this show and puts up with me on a somewhat daily basis. Thank you very much. David, my sidekick, who, you know, you did really well there. I tell you what, in fact, after the break, that was the most passionate I've seen you. It was awesome. Way to
Jimmy,
go.
you actually gave me a chance to chime in. Usually you get me when I'm just coming off a nap or I'm looking at the chat trying to say, what do we got to, I'm trying to make sure.
And I know that I was going to put all you guys on the spot about your cannabis story, but guess what? We ran out of time. So you could go onto the website now and you can share, and you too can perhaps win a prize. You at least get a t-shirt. Be one of our 5 finalists that we can talk about on a regular basis. We're going to give away one of these storage units once a month. So for the next 4 months, we've got this promotion going, and we're really looking for cross promotion on this. And please share what we are doing here at Pro Cannabis Media, which is telling the stories of the industry through your own words. Everybody in this industry has to understand that we are here to help you share your stories. And then it goes to the Garcia group that I was with this week that is bringing their hand-picked pre-rolls and what have you to the Massachusetts area as well. No one would get on camera to talk with me about why they're doing this and how good their stuff is and how important it is. Jerry would have gone on camera with me. Okay. If Jerry was here, he would have gone on camera with me and talked about it. That's another story for another day. So for everybody here, and Edmund and Matt and Rick and Tom, and we had Morgan and Deborah and Jeff and our new friend Jay Rosenthal from Canada. Thank you all for watching Green Rush Live. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. And thank you for sharing some time with us today. Have a good weekend, everybody. Coming up on We Talk News this week, a pair of Republican congressmen introduced the latest cannabis legalization bill, but will it make the floor? DC's Phil Adams has that story. The largest merger in the history of U.S. cannabis happened this week, and Trulieve is the big winner in that acquisition. And Green Market Report's Deborah Borchardt has that story. Another celebrity weed strain has made it coast to coast, and if you don't recognize whose this is, you better go do some homework. We're trucking, going down the road feeling bad while singing Uncle John's Band. Garcia, Handpicked, is now available on the East Coast. We Talk News is next.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to We Talk News. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media. If you've been following the legalization movement at the federal level, you know that only 35% of Republicans support the movement. So when 2 Republican reps decide this would be a good time to introduce the Common Sense Cannabis Reform for Veterans, Small Businesses, and Medical Professionals Act, you have to be encouraged. But then again, upon further review, a few things are missing, like any mention of righting social injustices. Vote Pro Podcast Phil Adams is our DC reporter, and he has more. Phil?
Hi, this is Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast, here with the Weed Talk News DC report. 2 Republican congressmen have introduced their version of cannabis legal reform to the House. Representatives David Joyce of Ohio and Don Young of Arkansas co-sponsored the Common Sense Cannabis Reform for Veterans, Small Businesses, and Medical Professionals Act. The new legislation would deschedule cannabis entirely from the Controlled Substances Act. Other highlights of the bill include protecting banks serving the legal cannabis industry, allowing cannabis to be sold and shipped across state lines where cannabis is legal, and ensuring access to medical cannabis for veterans. What the bill does not contain, however, is any provision for addressing social justice or reinvesting in communities impacted by the war on drugs. In introducing the bill, Young, a co-chair of the Congressional Cannabis Caucus, decried existing federal cannabis policy as an infringement on individual liberty and the rights of states under the 10th Amendment. Young said, quote, "It's long past time that these archaic laws are updated for the 21st century." Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, meanwhile, is saying once again that he and his Democratic colleagues in the Senate will be introducing their reform bill shortly. In an interview with The Ringer this week, Schumer reiterated his position that new cannabis banking legislation will have to wait for a comprehensive bill to pass first. Schumer indicated he doesn't want to undermine his bill by allowing reticent senators to vote for more moderate legislation instead, saying, quote, "We're not going to bargain against ourselves." Schumer has been working with Senate colleagues Ron Wyden of Oregon and Cory Booker of New Jersey to craft a comprehensive cannabis legalization bill. The U.S. State Department issued a report recognizing the positive effect cannabis legal reform has had on religious freedom in other countries. Their annual report on international religious freedom says nothing, however, about the religious discrimination that persists in the U.S., where cannabis remains federally illegal. In countries across the Caribbean, South America, and Africa, the move toward repealing harsh penalties for cannabis has given rise to a reduction in discrimination against Rastafarians, Hindus, and other groups. The report declines to mention the adverse effect cannabis criminalization continues to have here in the U.S., where federal courts routinely reject cases arguing for religious exceptions. Hundreds of thousands of Americans of all faiths are prosecuted for cannabis possession each year. That's the Weed Talk News DC report for this week. I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast.
Not sure when legalization, decriminalization, or regulation will happen this year, but MJ Biz is reporting now that the industry will add $92 billion to the U.S. economy in 2021. So with that in mind, there's been a major acquisition in the cannabis world as Trulieve has acquired Harvest. Green Market Report's Deborah Borchardt has the details on what is considered the biggest acquisition in weed history in the United States. Deborah?
I'm Deborah Borchardt, and this is the Green Market Report's business update for Weed Talk News. It was a huge week for Trulieve Cannabis Corp. This Florida-based company said it was buying Harvest Health and Recreation in a deal valued at approximately $2.1 billion. The combined businesses will have operations in 11 states with 126 dispensaries, serving both medical and adult use cannabis markets. Then on Thursday, Trulieve reported its earnings, saying revenues increased 102% to $193.8 million. We had another big company report earnings this week. Green Thumb Industries continues to flex. That company delivered total revenue of $194.4 million in the first quarter. That was up 89% from last year, and it beat the estimates. The company also delivered net income of $10.4 million versus last year's net loss. Now, in the not so great column, MedMen reported its revenue fell to $32 million from last year's $44 million. It also missed analyst estimates. We have a little bit of stock news to cover this week. There's a new U.S.-focused ETF trading under the ticker symbol MJUS. And Flora Growth priced an IPO this week and began trading over at the NASDAQ with the ticker FLGC. And those are your big business stories for the week.
Deborah Borchardt will be joining David Rabinovitz and myself on Green Rush Live on Friday's Green Rush Live show after 4 p.m. Now, by the time you see this news show, Minnesota's House of Representatives will have voted on the legalization of cannabis in that state. That does not mean, however, it will pass. One big reason, the Senate in that state is controlled by the Republicans. They are on record of opposing the measure, but advocates are hopeful the bill will at least get a chance to be voted on in that chamber. Now, another state in the Great Lakes in the Midwest is, of course, Michigan. They have a very vibrant cannabis market. And when it comes to vibrance in Michigan and cannabis, I think of Rick Thompson. That's why he's a Cannacaster for Weed Talk News. Rick?
Hello, everyone. I'm Rick Thompson with the Michigan Report for Weed Talk News. There's new guidance from the Michigan Department of Agriculture out last week about the sale of CBD-infused food products in Michigan. Well, it's not new news. They said all this before, but this time it seems like they're really serious about holding CBD companies to a federal standard when it comes to mandated safety testing for food products. Federally, CBD is not recognized by the Food and Drug Administration as allowable for human consumption, but the CBD industry exists in the largely unregulated market of products made from legal hemp crops. The guidance suggests that all CBD-bearing food items are forbidden from sale in the state, but as I mentioned, this isn't the first time MDARD has ordered a statewide shutdown. Some people are worried, some are not. Without enforcement, This is just another weak effort at scaring the public away from unregulated use of cannabinoids. Speaking of unregulated use of cannabinoids, Delta-8 THC is very much in the minds of regulators too. The cannabis derivative is a less intoxicating cousin of its more well-known Delta-9 THC and is commonly derived from hemp plants. It involves a difficult extraction process and has never been of commercial interest until now. Because the substance is so new and the method of extraction so difficult, many states have banned Delta-8 entirely, while a few others have chosen to regulate it, like the Delta-9 THC industry. Decision time is upon Michigan's legislature, as a bill has been introduced to add Delta-8 to the list of items regulated by the Marijuana Regulatory Agency. As this bill winds its way through the legislative process, we'll keep you updated. And that's the Michigan Report with Rick Thompson for Weed Talk News.
There's another state that is moving towards reforming its cannabis laws, and that one is Louisiana. Now, late Tuesday, the House of Representatives there voted 67-25 to decriminalize cannabis possession of less than 1/2 ounce of weed. Now, if you are in possession of more than that, you will not go to jail, but you will be fined $100. Now, that bill goes on to the Senate floor. We move on to Illinois with NORML's Executive Director, Margot Vaselli. Margot?
I'm Margot Vaselli from Margowana with this week's Weed Talk News Report from Illinois. The Illinois Cannabis Craft Association is telling us that investors are losing their confidence in the new licenses that were supposed to be rolled out, and they're taking their money elsewhere. Investors are being drained in order to stay on top of these license requirements, and they're losing hope. Well, I hope that they stay around long enough to see how this new proposed bill will be laid out. Even though last year's licenses were a complete scandal, minority groups have come together to push the state to allow for 110 more licenses to be rolled out the correct way. This will allow the original licenses to move forward and allow for an additional 110 licenses to be offered to social equity applicants with additional restrictions. It isn't perfect, but it's going to get us more licenses that we had originally offered last year, and it'll get us more accessibility sooner to the market, shared Representative LaShawn Ford. That's the Illinois Report. I'm Margot Vaselli from Weed Talk News.
For many years, the substance abuse community in the United States has studied cannabis use, looking for reasons to justify its stringent control as a Schedule I drug, and whether or not it really is an addictive substance or not. Over 30,000 studies have been done over the past few decades, and they're still looking for that answer. Now, the head of the National Institute for Drug Abuse, Nora Volkow, penned an essay that the federal government should consider decriminalization. In that published opinion piece, she says, drug use continues to be penalized despite the fact that punishment does not ameliorate substance abuse disorders or related problems. Imprisonment, whether for drug or other offenses, actually leads to much higher risk of drug overdose upon release, unquote. She then moves on to say that drug addiction should not be penalized criminally, but rather treated as a medical disorder. Caring for patients is what drives nurses, and that includes our own green nurse, Kennecaster Jessie Lynn Dolan from Vermont. Jessie Lynn?
Thanks, Jimmy. I'm Jessie Lynn Dolan from Nurse Grown Organics and Vermont Cannabis Nurses, and this is the Weed Talk News Vermont Report. NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, has now come to Vermont. NORML is the oldest cannabis reform organization, and the new Vermont chapter supports patients and consumers in their mission to achieve a safe and accessible cannabis market. The Green State NORML team submitted its first ever testimony to Vermont legislators this week. NORML hopes to centralize the voices of medical patients, providers, and caregivers with the ultimate goal of mitigating the lasting impact of the war on drugs. Speaking of, several social equity bills this 2021 Vermont legislative session have died. One bill would have created a cannabis-specific community social equity program, and another to prohibit discrimination based on hairstyles have both died. The other bill that has gone nowhere relates to racial impact statements, including the proposed legislation for racial and ethnic minorities. According to an ACLU report, racial disparity is significantly larger in Vermont than the national average, with Black people 6 times more likely to be arrested for cannabis possession than white people. Since 2018, Vermont has seen 471 expungements of marijuana possession convictions, but still has a long way to go. Vermont entrepreneur Ben Cohen, co-founder of Ben & Jerry's, is starting a cannabis business venture in Colorado producing low THC, high terpene pre-rolled joints. If successful in Colorado, he plans to expand to Vermont by licensing to Black entrepreneurs. The company's profit will help fund cannabis businesses owned by people of color and nonprofits that work for criminal justice reform, like the Last Prisoner Project. Ben Cohen said its purpose, aside from selling great cannabis, is to right the wrongs on the war of drugs. That's the Vermont Report. For Weed Talk News, I'm Vermont's cannabis nurse, Jessie Lynn Dolan.
Now it's time to check in on New Jersey as that state slowly creates its own adult use market. Now they have a medical market, and the 17th medical dispensary opened this week in Maplewood. Here's New Jersey's Tara Masu with that story. Tara?
I'm Tara Masu from Blazin' Bakery, and this is the New Jersey Report for Weed Talk News. Our 17th dispensary opened up this week in Maplewood, Apothecarium owned by the Canadian MSO TerrAscend. This is the first of the original 6 license owners to open all 3 of their dispensaries, consisting the first one of a vertically integrated facility and 2 satellites in the same region for TerrAscend, that is the northern region. While it's great to have all these new dispensaries open up, residents are still eagerly awaiting the arrival of both adult use and some diversity via social justice and local owners in both physical dispensaries and product selection. In another city, Atlantic City, we might finally see a long due revitalization being saved by cannabis. For over 2 decades, Atlantic City has had aggressive marketing efforts, a bevy of failed casinos, 3 of which were owned by former President Trump and have been shuttered since. On the Atlantic City Boardwalk, we currently have an operating dispensary, The Botanist, which is owned by a Canadian company, Acreage Holding, and the soon-to-be opened Bee Dispensary, which is owned by Ianthus/MPX. Both of these are also publicly traded MSOs. Aside from the current license holders, we have an eye on some new license holders who would be really poised to win in the next round. Most notably, Mafia associate George Martorano. He has the record for being the longest serving, nonviolent, first-time offender in cannabis, where he served 32 years of a life sentence. George currently owns the Hip Hemp Cafe in Atlantic City, with locations also in Philadelphia and Delaware. This is a CBD dispensary, which he hopes to get a license to have a THC dispensary. He has a really great chance based on having site control with his current location and being a great example of social justice. Also, in Atlantic City, someone else has their eye on a location there, the ever-present cannabis force, Snoop Dogg. I have been Tara Masu, and this is the New Jersey Report for Weed Talk News.
And finally tonight, the power of the celebrity brand in cannabis. Last week, we told you about Tommy Chong's pre-rolls entering the Michigan market. This week, it's Jerry Garcia's turn. Now, please bear with me when I explain who the late Jerry Garcia is. I added in the late part because he passed away in 1995, but as any deadhead knows, he will live forever in eternity. He was an original member and lead guitarist for the legendary Grateful Dead band. Now his family is licensing and distributing the Garcia hand-picked line of cannabis. What a long, strange trip it's been towards legalization. The Garcia hand-picked brand is now available at a bunch of dispensaries all over California and now here in Massachusetts. It made a stop at Cultivate in Framingham this week. The Bertha promotion bus has been all over this state as they launch these hand-picked products on the East Coast. Now, we aren't sharing any of the music that was playing in the background since we don't want to violate any copyright laws. However, I could sing a few bars of one of Jerry's favorite songs, Uncle John's Band, but I won't. That'll do it for this week's Weed Talk News. I'm Jimmy Young. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly.
Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first.
Hi, Jimmy Young here, and I have to ask you, are you secure? If you're in the cannabis industry, you have to have security for your grow facility or dispensary. And we are so happy to welcome Salient Systems to our group of supporters. You get to call their rep. His name is Ben Shower at SalientSys.com. So don't even wait an hour. Call Ben Shower at 413-333-7974.
Pro Cannabis Media programming is available live and on demand on our Facebook page at Pro Canna Media, on Instagram at Pro Cannabis Media, on LinkedIn also at Pro Cannabis Media, on YouTube and YouTube Live on Pro Cannabis Media, Twitter at Pro Canna Media, and on